Myanmar's ruling junta has ended the country's state of emergency and announced the formation of a commission that will hold an election later this year. But that's to be led by the military chief, Min Aung Hlaing. It would be the first national vote since a 2021 coup sparked a civil war. But the UN says it's merely a bid to legitimize the military's continuing rule. So let's get more on this with independent analyst David Matheson. David, good to have you with us again today. Now, is it of any significance at all, the lifting of emergency rule in Myanmar? Does it change anything for the residents there?
It changes absolutely nothing. It's a flurry of activity changing from one regime to a new one, with all of the same people involved, with lots of flurry of changing of legislation, the appearance of preparing for an election, but it really changes nothing on the ground for the people of Myanmar.
So the military wants to hold these elections, I think that's in December, but to be overseen by Min Aung Hlaing. Do you expect, any future election to be anywhere closely free and fair, and who might even want to participate? Will opposition groups, those aligned with Aung San Suu Kyi and her NLD party, be participating?
Well, I think that there are far more unknowns about this process, and the regime, whether it's the one that existed yesterday or the new, what they call the State Security and Peace Commission, whether they're actually sincere about holding genuine elections, I completely doubt that. This is just a regime reformation. In terms of who's actually going to participate, large parts of the country are under control of anti-regime insurgent fighters and their supporters. So there won't be any elections being held there, as far as we know. And so any election will probably be held under very strict security conditions in mostly urban areas and some rural areas that the military still controls. And in terms of the opposition parties and the insurgent groups, most of them have rejected this election outright and have done so since the coup d'etat of 2021. There are going to be something like 57 registered political parties that will be contesting, that have been formally registered. But a lot of them are completely unrepresentative and are basically minor parties of no significance.
Yes, and do you expect any members of the military, possibly Min Aung Hlaing himself, to step away from the military, establish a civilian political party to contest those elections? Because this is a move that we have seen before playing out in Myanmar, but also in Thailand, even in Pakistan.
I don't think anything is out of the realm of possibilities here. I mean, this is a military regime that's making it up as they go along. One thing to consider is that in the previous iteration, something like 15, 20 years ago, the military spent years and years building up a civilian infrastructure that then transformed into a political party to contest the 2010 elections, which it won. And then lost the 2015 and 2020 elections against the National League for Democracy. It's not too late for Min Aung Hlaing to actually form his own party. Even he announced a few months ago that political party registration was to cease on May the 9th. But in recent days, we've seen more parties actually register. So that could be one of his ploys here to actually form his own party. But he's a deeply unpopular individual, reviled, hated by large parts of the population. So if he thinks that there's some kind of electoral out for him in doing that, I think he's fooling himself and the rest of the country.
David, what's in the timing of this announcement today? Why now, 4 years roughly since the coup that deposed a civilian government and saw Aung San Suu Kyi put in prison?
I think it's the culmination of 4 years of them floundering around, not really knowing what they're doing. Announcing multi-party elections something like nearly 3 years ago as a way forward. And some of us expected that there would be elections in 2023. And that didn't come to pass, mostly because of the deteriorating security situation around the country and the fact that the military was suffering a great deal of defeats. It has since consolidated partly its rule. And the way that it's done that is through this very draconian forced conscription law, which they came out with last February, and which they've forcibly recruited more than 50,000 new soldiers into the army. And I think that that's one of many factors. I don't think that they're feeling much international pressure, certainly not from the West, to hold these elections. But some of its neighbours are probably China, and India to a certain extent, some of the members of the Association for Southeast Asian Nations, calling on Min Aung Hlaing to find a way out of this mess. And this is the incredibly imperfect vehicle that he's constructing to actually do that. Whether that works and it stabilizes the country, I have complete doubt that it will actually succeed, and I think violence will continue.
Yes, and so if, as you say, if there's some level of pressure coming from Myanmar's neighbors, the big ones, India and particularly China, what's in it for them?
I think for China, it's certainly not democracy, and it's certainly not elections. China doesn't care about these things. What it cares about is stability and some kind of transition out of the mess that Myanmar is currently in. So I think China and the neighbors will go along with the elections, but not with any real compassion. It's purely out of self-interest. And if there's some kind of process that they can kind of hitch onto and claim that there is a reformist movement going on, even knowing that it's not genuine and even in the midst of further violence, I think that they probably will go along with the election, but not for the well-being of the people of Myanmar. It would be purely out of their own economic and security interests.
Yes, and can you tell us what do we know at the moment about Aung San Suu Kyi? I mean, of course, she has been put in prison in one form or the other. What do we know about her welfare at the moment?
Unfortunately, very little. We know that she has been unjustly imprisoned for the past 4.5 years since she was democratically elected in 2020, put through a macabre show trial and put up with trumped-up charges. We know that she's in a detention facility somewhere in the military capital of Naypyidaw. Her condition, I think we should all be very, very concerned about. She's 80 years old, and reports of her being ill have surfaced, but actual details are very hard to come by. But one thing to say is that I think this is a moment with the announcement of these elections and these regime transformations to redouble, triple calls for her and 20,000 other political prisoners to be released immediately and unconditionally.
Yes, and given in the context of a global conflicts happening around the world, we mustn't forget that the civil war is still happening in Myanmar. And I read the reports saying the military itself only controls roughly 20-odd% of the country. David, what's happening on the ground as far as the fighting is concerned?
Well, it's a very confusing situation in the sense that there are multiple conflicts raging in the west, the north, even in the center, up and down the eastern border with Thailand, all along that border pretty much. And yet the cities, Yangon, the major capital, and Mandalay, which suffered that horrific earthquake back in late March, are relatively stable but not exactly economically thriving. And I think there's a lot of concerns that an election in December could actually reverse that, and there could actually be more elections-related violence. And to that end, actually, the regime 2 days ago issued a quite draconian law threatening penalties for anyone involved in trying to obstruct any future election, with the penalties of 3 years of any kind of minor obstruction to death if someone is actually charged with targeting someone from a rival political party or polling workers. So I think the relative calm in the centre of the country could actually be disrupted by these elections.
Yes, and is it a possibility as well that given how much fighting that's been taking place, that the military itself has been drained of its own resources, given those many years of fighting, and that's why they perhaps are now calling for these elections?
I think that's part of it. But as I said, this conscription law that they put in place nearly a year and a half ago now has forcibly recruited more than 50,000 soldiers, and that recruitment is ongoing. And that's probably enough in some areas for them to hold on militarily. And unfortunately, we've seen in the past several weeks some of the gains from the armed opposition gaining kind of major strategic towns in several parts of the country over the past year and a half have actually gone back to the Myanmar military after quite heavy fighting. So in terms of the conflict, it's still quite dramatic in some parts of the country, but the military unfortunately seems to be prevailing in some other key areas.
Okay, David Matheson, always appreciate your analysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you.